Have you ever just stopped to think about the journey we all take? I mean, it's absolutely incredible. We start out as these tiny, completely helpless beings, and somehow we grow into adults who can do things like perform heart surgery, play a beautiful piano concerto, or pilot a jet. It's one of the most fundamental, yet totally mind-boggling stories of human life. So, how exactly does that story get written?
Right. This is the big question for our explainer today. What is the actual process that bridges this seemingly impossible gap? How do we go from these reflexive, uncoordinated little movements to the absolute pinnacle of human skill? Well, it's not magic, it's a blueprint that's written right into our development.
And believe me, what a gap it is. On one side, you've got a newborn. Their vision is about 20/40. Now what that means is, something an adult sees clearly from 240 feet away, a baby has to be just 20 feet away to see it. And their movements? Totally dominated by reflexes, like automatically turning their head if you stroke their cheek. Then, on the other side, you've got an adult driving a car, a ridiculously complex act of coordination, perception, and action all at once. The difference is just staggering.
So, where does this whole incredible journey even begin? Well, it starts the second we're born, with a set of, let's call them pre-installed programs. See, we aren't blank slates. We come equipped with this whole suite of reflexes, and they're all designed for one primary purpose: survival.
Just think about what these reflexes are for. The rooting reflex, that helps a baby find a nipple to feed. The sucking reflex is, well, for nourishment, obviously. And the moro reflex, that classic startle response where a baby flings its arms out, that's thought to be this primal way of grabbing on for support. Some of these fade away, but others, like the grasping reflex, they become the very foundation for more complex, voluntary actions later on. It's pretty cool.
But these reflexes, they're really just the beginning. From here, we have to learn to actually control our bodies in a really complex world. This is the great leap forward, where we start to master movement, beginning with one of the biggest milestones of them all: learning to walk.
For a long time, the thinking was that development was kind of like a pre-written script. A researcher named Arnold Gesell, he observed that babies seem to hit these milestones, rolling over, sitting up, standing, in a pretty fixed order. So he concluded it was all just a genetic plan unfolding on its own schedule. He called the process maturation. But today, we have a much more exciting and, honestly, a more flexible theory pioneered by Esther Thielen. It's called dynamic systems theory. And the big idea here is that babies actively assemble motor skills. So it's less like a fixed script and way more like a jazz improvisation. They combine their motivation, their body's physical properties, and all the feedback they're getting from the environment to figure things out on the fly.
So what does this improvisation actually look like in real life? Well, it all starts with motivation. A baby sees a toy they really want. Then they make a ballpark attempt, right? Maybe it's a clumsy stumble forward. Then comes the most critical part: fine-tuning. Through these repeated cycles of acting and then perceiving the results, they adjust. They learn, and the movement becomes smoother and more effective until, bam, they can get that toy every single time.
And this quote just brilliantly illustrates the mystery of it all. We all went through this incredible period of learning, this intense trial and error, but for almost all of us, the memory is just gone. As Selma Freyberg wrote, we are foreigners in the land of our own infancy.
And when I say intense trial and error, I really mean it. Just check out these numbers. Researchers watching toddlers found that they take, on average, over 2,300 steps an hour. And in that same hour, they fall about 17 times. I mean, can you imagine? That is an incredible amount of practice, persistence, and data collection happening every single day.
And all that practice, it absolutely pays off in this series of incredible achievements. First, they gain the strength just to lift their own head. Then, they find the balance to sit up all by themselves, and before you know it, they're pulling themselves up to stand. And finally, right around their first birthday, standing alone, ready to take those first wobbly steps.
So where does all this learning eventually lead? Well, to our physical peak. And what's really fascinating is that the peak shows up at different times depending on the skill. For the explosive power you see in swimmers and gymnasts, it's often in the late teens. For sprinters, it's more like the mid-20s. And for endurance athletes like marathon runners, it can be as late as their early 30s.
Of course, moving our bodies is really only half the story. I mean, to move effectively, we first have to make sense of the world around us, and for that, we need our senses.
Okay, so to really get this, we need to separate two key ideas, sensation and perception. Sensation, that's just the raw data. Light hitting your eyes, sound waves hitting your eardrums. Perception is what your brain does with that data. It's the interpretation. You could say sensation is the note, perception is the music.
Let's just take vision, for example. Imagine the world slowly coming into focus. For a newborn, it's just a blurry wash of shapes and light. But by 6 months, faces get clearer, details start to emerge, and by their first birthday, the world looks almost as sharp and vibrant as it does to you and me.
But the brain does something even more amazing with all this visual data. It understands constancy. So as a car drives away from you, the image on your retina gets smaller and smaller, right? But do you think the car is actually shrinking? Of course not. Your brain just knows the car's size is constant. And what's amazing is that babies show signs of this remarkable ability as early as 3 months old. So how do we actually perceive the world? Well, according to the ecological view from Eleanor and James Gibson, we don't just see objects, we see affordances, which is basically a fancy word for opportunities for interaction. A chair affords sitting, a floor affords walking. To a baby, a wobbly waterbed might not afford walking, but it definitely affords crawling. We see the world in terms of what we can do in it.
And this brings us to the big, unifying idea of this entire explainer. You see, perception and action, they are not two separate things. They are fundamentally, inseparably linked in what you could call a lifelong dance.
Okay, first, perception guides action. You see the coffee cup on the table, and that perception guides your hand as you reach for it. You see a narrow little bridge, and that visual information guides how you adjust your walk to cross it safely. Pretty simple, right?
But, and this is the really brilliant part, it's a two-way street. Action also guides perception. By moving around and interacting with the world, we actually educate our senses. We literally learn about the world by acting within it.
And this brilliant loop is absolutely everywhere you look. By crawling, a baby learns about the texture of a rug versus a hardwood floor and how the world looks from all these new angles. By handling an object, they learn its weight and its shape. And when you're driving a car, you're in a constant high-speed loop of perceiving the road and acting on the steering wheel all at the same time.
And this dance, it doesn't just stop when we become adults. Nope, it continues throughout our entire lives. As we get older, our bodies and our senses change, and so the dance shifts from one of growth to one of adaptation.
As you can see in this chart, sensory decline often picks up speed in late adulthood. Look at hearing impairment, for instance. The prevalence nearly doubles for folks 75 and older compared to the 65 to 74 age group. And what this means is that the perception action loop has to adapt. Maybe movements get a little slower, or we rely more on visual cues. These are all just ways we change the steps of the dance as the inputs themselves change.
You see, this process of learning and adapting, it never really ends. From a baby learning to walk to an older adult learning to navigate a staircase with new glasses, we are always fine-tuning the dance between what we sense and what we do. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What new skill, big or small, are you currently learning? How are you actively shaping your own perception action dance right now?